Okay, so welcome to the last part of Lecture 14. I figured we might as well start this off with one of the best chase scenes of all time, right? So those of you that haven't seen Terminator 2 before, we've got the Terminator T-1000 here is uh, chasing the boy, who will become the savior or whatever. And so and so why are we showing this? Well, I figured when we talk about rigid linings here, right, which we're going to talk about in a second. Obviously, LA's storm system here, which at one point probably was a riverbed, has now been turned into what we would call a threshold channel that is supposed to be, basically not movable during design storm events, including semi-chase scenes, right? So, okay. So, right, when we talk about threshold channels, we've got a couple of different types. We've got rigid linings, and we've also got flexible linings. So, rigid linings are pretty straightforward, right? They're cast-in-place concrete or asphaltic concrete, as we saw in the Terminator chase scene here. They can be stone masonry of interlocking modular block, soil cement, roller compacted concrete, grouted riprap, etc. Right, and so these would be very rigid. They would not be meant to move under any kind of circumstances, right? Earthquakes or whatever, things like that would damage it. These are meant to be installed, and they're meant to not have really any give, right? So that's rigid linings, and it really goes with this concept of rigid, right? They're meant to be put in place, and not, there's no flex in them. And we can kind of contrast these with flexible linings, right? And so flexible linings basically come in three main groupings, right? We've got three main groupings here. We've got long-term linings, and we'll talk about what these are, but they're used where roadside channels require protection for the service life of the channel, right? They're long-term. We've got these things that are called transitional linings, and these are kind of the linings that basically establish our long-term goals. And then we've got temporary, which is kind of on that other far side of the spectrum. These are linings that are basically, put in place to get things started, maybe to get into the transitional state, which then would eventually lead us to the long-term lining. So let's look at these in a little bit of detail here, but not too much. So again, long-term linings would be used where roadside channels require protection against erosion for the service life of the channel. And so you could have vegetative, like grass swales. We could put in place cobbles, riprap, wire enclosed riprap like gabions, or non-degradable turf reinforcement through some sort of fibers, right? And so these would be put in. They'd be put in for the life of the channel, forever, basically, maybe 50 years or something. And they're meant to be permanent structures, but also flexible, right? But also flexible. And we could get in and maintain these things as needed. So transitional linings, right, these facilitate basically the establishment of the long-term flexible lining, right? So, and these are commonly vegetated, right, vegetation. So we could have bare soil, could have vegetative such as annual grasses or gravel mulch. We could use open weave textiles that are degradable and are going to degrade over time, and by the time they degrade, hopefully the long-term lining is in place. It might be vegetation, erosion control blankets or mats, and then again turf reinforcement. So, and our final thing to talk about for this lecture is temporary linings, and we've all seen lots of these all over the place. Anytime we have a disturbance, we tend to see temporary linings, especially in areas where we might have some runoff, right? And these linings are used maybe without vegetation to line channels that are part of construction site, erosion control systems, other short-term channels. So it could have been hydroseeded annual grasses, it could be bare soil, it could be gravel mulch. Again, it could be open weave textile or erosion control blankets to basically get us into the transitional state or into long-term linings. And so again, think about these linings. They're flexible. They can move with the earth. They could be moved with high flow. They could kind of take some of the form a little bit of a stream channel, although most of these are used probably more for threshold type channels. You could use some of these with alluvial channels where we're doing some restoration, and then these things might degrade eventually by the time that alluvial channel is now stable. So flexible linings are very different. There's engineering that goes into it, but they're not rigid, and might not require the extensive design that putting in a cast-in-place concrete system might. So that's it for this lecture. We'll talk about all of these, and we'll do some design of armoring when we meet for class.